Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. Happy Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Friday the 13th, Triskaidekaphobia. Actually, Friday the 13th generally tends to be a day good things happen to me, and certainly happened to my wife earlier today, and we'll mention that obliquely later, but not go into details. But so far, it's turning out to be a good day here locally. We've got lots of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And a reminder for those of you who are in nice, warm, loving, supportive relationships, tomorrow's Valentine's Day. So if you have not already prepared, you only have the rest of today to go on out and get whatever you're going to celebrate with: roses, cards, chocolate, whipped cream, duct tape, whatever it is that you do your thing, you know, better get out there and get that done here. All righty. Well, turning over to the situation. Oh, and by the way, the Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3. Turning to the situation in Ukraine, there is already a segment of the Kiev leadership that is outright rejecting the Minsk deal. The leader of the right sector, Dmitry Yarosh, said his movement rejects the Minsk peace deal and that they will continue active fighting according to their own plan. So the ceasefire looks like it's not going to happen, and it's telegraphing to the world that Poroshenko isn't actually in control of Kiev right now. Not if he can't get his own people in line there. Now, adding to the complex, the Ukrainian media is quoting Foreign Minister Pavlo Klimkin as saying as the amnesty that was a part of the Minsk agreement will not apply to the leaders of the Donbass militia. So basically, Kiev has already broken the terms of the Minsk agreement. Our media is going to say Russia did it, Russia broke it, Russia didn't keep to whatever, but no, it's Kiev that has walked away from the deal. I mean, Poroshenko, just mere hours after signing this agreement, was trying to retroactively change the deal here. Walking around saying, I'm changing the Minsk agreement. Pray I don't alter it any further. Gets out his lightsaber. Now, fighting does continue. The ceasefire officially begins midnight on Saturday. But the fighting is going on. Apparently the fiercest fighting is around Debaltsev, a strategic town. And it's very intense. It doesn't look like anybody is getting ready to, like, let the weapons cool off here. And apparently there's been a very horrible tragedy. In the Kirov district of Donetsk, the Kiev forces shelled a kindergarten. And I guess they thought those little tiny children represented a threat to the rise and power of the global private central bankers or something like that. They're getting very serious about the desertion problem they're dealing with in the Kiev forces, and there's a story that came out of LiveLeak. As you're probably hearing from the independent media, certainly not from the corporate media, desertion has become a major problem from the Kiev forces, with large numbers of troops, including entire units, deserting to the other side. And apparently the order has gone back out that deserters or anybody just wanting to surrender is going to be shot. And now we're getting a report that 3 soldiers in the Kiev forces wanted to go over to the other side, and they were shot and killed by their own troops. Now that is usually a sign of a fighting force that is desperate. Now, the other day we were talking about the fact that Poroshenko was coming on out there with a new law that says anyone who doubts the official declaration that Russia is to blame for all of this is going to go to prison. And now they're coming up with new laws that Ukrainians who oppose mobilization are now considered criminals. Even at the height of the war in Vietnam, draft dodgers were criminals. But their families who stood up and said the draft is wrong were protected by the First Amendment. Now over in Ukraine, if you just stay there, the mobilization is wrong, draft is wrong, we don't want to keep our families at home, you can be arrested. And these two laws, I think, are sending a very clear signal to the people of Ukraine what kind of government they're going to be living under. If Poroshenko is still in power when this is all over, it's not going to be democracy. It's not going to be a republic. It's going to be an iron-fisted, tyrannical dictatorship, which is usually what results from every U.S. intervention into another country under the guise of bringing them democracy. They never actually get democracy. They get an absolute dictatorship with pretensions of democracy. They'll put on a little theater presentation, a pageant. See, we're democratic. We had another election where I was the only candidate and I won. See, I'm democratically elected here. Story out of Daily Mail in Great Britain. The United States is deploying 12 A-10 tank buster jets to Europe in response to Russia's continued aggression in Ukraine. It's part of Operation Atlantic Resolve. Is there somebody in an office who's paid to just come up with these weird names? Operation Atlantic Resolve, Operation Toe Fungus, Operation Third Time's a Charm, whatever they're going to call it here. And the A-10 is a very effective platform, and there's a big controversy going on in the Pentagon because the Pentagon leadership want to scrap it and spend a whole bunch more money developing a replacement, which based on recent performance is going to be much more expensive and nowhere near as good as what they've got now. We're continuing to hear the backlash of this goof that happened yesterday where Senator Jim Inhofe, either innocently or just figured we wouldn't notice, presented photographs claiming to show Russian troops and tanks inside Ukraine, saying that it vindicated his call for an immediate direct U.S. intervention in Ukraine. And as we pointed out yesterday, anybody with Google's image search could have found those pictures very, very quickly. And it turned out they're not current. They're from 2008. And as it turns out, they weren't even taken in Ukraine. They're photographs from Georgia, Ossetia. One of them was actually from Russia. Yes, there are going to be Russian tanks on the ground in Russia. And Jim Inhofe was out there just waving these around saying, see, the Russians are invading. We've got to send troops. We've got to send American sons and daughters and lots of money over there. So he's basically out there with his 7-year-old photos and looking, probably right now, I imagine Brian Williams is feeling very relieved. Because compared to what Jim Inhofe just tried to pull off, lying about being shot down, that's nothing. So. Interesting video came out of the Ukrainian parliament in Kiev. It was over on Live Leak, and apparently two of the parliamentarians got into a rather heated debate about passage of a specific bill, which broke out into an outright fistfight in the halls of the parliament. They had to be pulled apart by uniformed troops. One of them got a bloody nose, and they were really going at it. And they looked like they're trained boxers. They weren't just flailing like people who don't know what they're doing here. And I thought it was fun to watch, and I'd be willing to donate a couple of my swords to the Ukrainian parliament to help settle some of these debates in the future. And Kiev could probably pay off all of its debts to the IMF and the World Bank by letting their parliamentarians settle their debates in an arena with swords and sell it on pay-per-view. They'd raise a huge amount of money on that one. And they need to do that because we're seeing this report out of QZ.com. Ukraine is headed for total economic collapse. And as you know, coincident with the Minsk meeting, which now appears to have been completely pointless, all of a sudden the taps were opened and money started flowing into Ukraine. All of it loans at interest. Nobody's giving anybody anything. And IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde announced that with this new $17 billion bailout package are coming certain requirements, including getting rid of all those stupid little social programs. You're just wasting money on needy people. In other words, it's austerity. Austerity has wrecked the lives of everyone all across Europe and driven Greece to the point of leaving the EU. So, yeah, sure, let's try it on Ukraine. What could go wrong? We'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we have been saying for, well, pretty much a year by now that all of this brouhaha in Ukraine goes back to the fact that Ukraine's previous elected legitimate government was weighing the options between merging with the European Union and moving closer to Russia. and Russia made a more attractive deal. And that's when this covert overthrow was set up to get rid of the elected government and put in a junta who would enslave the people of Ukraine to the European Central Bank, the IMF, and the World Bank. And that triggered all the violence since then. And the corporate media has been the chorus of propaganda. It's Russia's fault. It's Russia's fault. It's Russia's fault. And no, it isn't. This is a U.S. not very covert aggression against a nation that didn't want to be part of our Western private central banking slavery. And now, the ex-president of Israel, Giorgio Napolitano, came out today saying exactly the same thing. Russia's got nothing to do with it. It was this very hastily signed EU association deal that triggered all of this upset. So, anyway. Now, over in Yemen, the situation is really out of control. I noticed that on Fox News earlier today, they were screaming about how could the U.S. be caught off guard by Yemen when we've got all this spy satellites and drones and what's going on here. And I don't know that the U.S. was actually caught off guard so much as their resources are stretched way too thin. And it's just like the Roman Empire. After they lost those 3 legions up in Germany, they didn't have enough military force to police the empire efficiently, even with their roads. And so when the legions were over on this side putting down a rebellion, this other province on the other side would break away. And their legions would scurry across trying to get that one back, and then somebody over here would break away. And what it came down to is Yemen was breaking away from the U.S. empire, and they just didn't really have resources to put in there. So now Yemen is back in the hands of the Yemenite people. Everybody's screaming, oh, they're Al-Qaeda, they're ISIS, they're litterers, they're bad people. And all of the countries who were in there, who were part of this whole puppet regime, are now getting out before they get kicked out. We know that France, Britain, and the United States have abandoned their embassies. They were trying to make a big deal about how those Yemenites, they stole the cars from the U.S. Embassy. Well, you couldn't take them with you. And as it turns out, they left the keys in them. Yeah. When you leave your keys in the cars in the embassy, they're going to get stolen here. Now Saudi Arabia is closing their embassy in Yemen. So I don't think we're going to see a lot about that after the current let's bash Obama over the head with it on the corporate media. Don't want the rest of the provinces getting uppity ideas that they can break away. That's why you never hear about Iceland anymore. Now, down in Israel, Intelligence Affairs Minister Yuval Steinitz warned that Israel could act unilaterally against Iran regarding its nuclear program, saying Tehran has failed to make the concessions Israel demands in talks with the P5+1, forgetting that Israel isn't actually part of the P5+1. So they're dropping hints about Israel just going on in and blowing up Iran's nuclear power plant and its fuel rod processing facility and its medical isotope facility and everything else. And you need to remember, Israel bombed the civilian nuclear power station in Osirak, Iraq, claiming it was a nuclear weapons factory. And following the invasion in 2003, international experts examined the ruins of the Iraqi power station, and they found no evidence at all of it being anything other than a civilian nuclear power station. There was no sign of a concealed nuclear weapons factory like Israel has underneath Dimona. So if Israel does go ahead and bombs Iran's power station, Iran would be well advised to immediately invite international inspectors with the appropriate radiation protection to fully inspect the remains of the facility and confirm that Israel is batting zero at identifying nuclear weapons facilities in other countries. And we should add exposing the Iranian people to a nuclear disaster. Because that nuclear power station in Iran is running. If Israel bombs it, it will be a disaster on the scale of a Chernobyl. And from Israel's point of view, who cares about the Iranians? We have to get the bomb factory, which isn't really there, and therefore we have a right to bomb Iran's nuclear power station. And before they do the bombs away number, I would like to remind the government of Israel that there is a very large population of Jews living comfortably in Iran who will be downwind of this nuclear disaster. And I guess they don't matter either. Now, there's this very bizarre story that came out of Israel National News. New al-Qaeda videos show steady advance along Israeli border. And they're talking about this video that supposedly came from the Syrian Nusra Front rebel group, showing al-Qaeda and ISIS traveling along the Syrian-Israeli border. And what that video does not show are Israeli troops shooting at them or ISIS and al-Qaeda shooting at Israel. Kind of a weird thing, don't you think? They just seem to know that all is peace and harmony when they're close to Israel here. Meanwhile, the Syrian rebels have openly called on Israel to bomb Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran. So apparently ISIS or al-Qaeda or whatever name they're going to apply to those rebels now seem to feel that Israel is certainly open to their suggestion about designating targets for attacks here. Now, here in the United States Congress, as you know, the authorization for the use of military force from Obama is being much discussed and talked about. And apparently, the Jewish contingent within the Republican Party is demanding that Jews be identified as a specific targeted minority of the evil ISIS in this bill. This is being led by Representative Lee Zeldin of New York. And it's being backed by the Republican Jewish coalition. So they're still in this thing. We are the victims. We're the poor people. We're the targets. You've got to make special mention so that we can get special funding. Anyway. By the way, speaking of victims and funding, Rachel Corrie's family have taken their lawsuit to hold the government of Israel responsible for the death of Rachel Corrie all the way up to Israel's Supreme Court, who has, not to anybody's surprise, rejected the claim. Now, for those of you who don't remember, Rachel Corrie was an American activist who was working in Palestine trying to work against the arbitrary demolitions of Palestinian homes. And an Israeli bulldozer ran her over twice. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as we were talking about before we went to the break here, Rachel Corrie's family has pursued the legal remedy for the murder of their daughter through the entire Israeli court system, right up to the Israeli Supreme Court, who basically said, nah, we're not responsible. Now, Rachel Corrie was run over by an Israeli bulldozer that was there to demolish a Palestinian home, and the bulldozer then backed up over her again. Now, everyone's all saying, oh, what a horrible death for that Jordanian pilot to be burned alive in the cage. Well, being crushed is also very painful. Rachel did not die instantly. But we're not supposed to worry about her. She doesn't count. Or Fergan Dogan, the kid from New York who was gunned down by the Israelis in international waters on that aid flotilla. We're not supposed to care about him, but we're supposed to be just enraged by the Jordanian pilot being burned alive so that we're going to be ready to fling our own children to death and dismemberment in retaliation. And I think we need to draw a perspective. And I'm not trying to trivialize what was done to that Jordanian pilot. We don't even really know who did it to him, just who we're being told about it. But Germany right now is in the process of marking the 70th anniversary of the firebombing of Dresden during World War II. And that's something the U.S. government doesn't want you to remember, because over 100,000 people burned alive during the firebombing. And it was all the more terrible because Dresden was not a military center. It was targeted because it was iconically important to the German people. It was a cultural center, an arts center. They made very fine products like China. We've all heard Dresden, China, pre-war. It was amazing stuff. And the city was targeted for complete and utter destruction for its propaganda value, to just shock and awe the German people into surrendering. Reason they firebombed Tokyo. And the reason, of course, Truman nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan was already trying to surrender at that point. They'd lost the war. And Truman dropped the 2 different bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the uranium bomb and then the plutonium bomb, to prove to the world that we really had them and that the United States government was psychotic enough to use them. But let's all get worried about this Jordanian pilot in the cage, because he was a military pilot engaged in war over enemy territory. And if you get into a plane or a tank or a ship or just into your boots, walking into the other territory to commit acts of war, you accept up front. You could get killed. And it may be a very unpleasant death. Flamethrowers, napalm, stepping on a landmine. Now, last night we had this story that was breaking about how ISIS had captured al-Assad Air Base where 300 Marines were trapped. And the reports were flying all over the place, and the first thing I thought is, just in time to help Obama cram his authorization for the use of military force through a very reluctant Congress. Because we're all expecting ISIS, nudge nudge, wink wink, say no more, to do something like blowing up the Statue of Liberty, or the already cracked up Washington Monument, or the overdue for replacement Golden Gate Bridge. However, as of the last reports, the base was never actually captured. There was some kind of an attack that was immediately repelled. But they were trying to blow it up as, oh my goodness, ISIS the threat, ISIS the threat. We've got to go to war against ISIS. And there's actually an article over at Investment Watch blog saying we should be ready for a modern-day Pearl Harbor to really crank up this world war into rock and roll, full-tilt, afterburner overdrive. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. We're going to go to John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? John, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Ow, yes. Now I can hear you.
Hello, Michael. Yeah.
Would somebody answer the phone? Okay. All right.
Yeah, I was mentioning Rachel Corrie in relation to this Jordanian pilot. At least Rachel Corrie was trying to prevent violence and what have you. This pilot was perpetrating the violence. So
Rachel Corrie was a non-combatant. Rachel Corrie was a non-combatant. She was not committing any acts of war against Israel. She was just trying to save some houses.
Yeah, well, I mean, only a couple of hundred years back, the Catholics were burning witches, the Americans were burning black people. Good grief, you know, this thing has been actually blown out of all proportion to try and conditize the American people.
Well, no, this does not count as conditization, but it's definitely propagandizing us to want to just hate ISIS to the point where we're willing to fling our own children into the flames to get at them. And it really isn't working. Because, again, most people are sitting back and realizing this Jordanian pilot was carrying out airstrikes over enemy territory. We don't know what he did before he was captured. He may have dropped bombs on innocent civilians. And I'm not saying that justifies the way that he was executed. And, again, I'm not willing to take anybody's word that ISIS burned this guy up, especially since the video came through Site Intelligence Group and Rita Katz.
Again, it's always that side intelligence. This nonsense with Al-Qaeda along the Israeli-Syrian border has just been, if you like, blown out of the water because the Syrian army has just taken one of the major border towns in that area and in the lower Golan, and they look as though there's a major push by the Syrian army and its allies to push ISIS, Al-Qaeda, whatever they're calling themselves today, off that border and prevent them from obtaining Israeli military support. So
Well, that's going to be a real trick without actually crossing into Israeli territory, and of course Netanyahu would love that because then he's got a new enemy to campaign on for the coming elections.
Yeah, the other thing is the Kurds around Kobani in northern Syria have now taken 134 of the surrounding villages back from ISIS, and ISIS look to be on the run from that area. So things are not looking very positive for the American agenda to move into Syria to get ISIS.
Yeah, and I'm sure Assad is smart enough to realize that if he gets rid of ISIS himself, then he can tell the U.S., you can't come in here. ISIS is gone. We got rid of them. No excuse to come on in here. But, the U.S. will just parachute a bunch of ISIS back in there and get a picture of them through site intelligence groups to say, ISIS is still here. ISIS is in Damascus. ISIS is on the Eiffel Tower. ISIS is on Buckingham Palace, and we've got to invade and bomb all those countries.
Well, and the Ukrainian situation is turning into the nonsense, this Minsk agreement. He's failing as we speak.
I'm calling it the Minsk agreement, because they already dropped that thing in the shredder.
Yeah, well, it's already been shredded by the right sector and Svoboda. And in fact, the Democratic Republic of Donetsk and the Democratic Republic of Lugansk, because they weren't invited. They were supposed to sign it after this discussion where they weren't involved in, but it appears that things aren't going to...
I wouldn't have signed it. Other people get together and come to an agreement on what I'm going to do and then say, sign on to... No, I don't think so. John, I got to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. We got a commercial break here. We got another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as you know, the President is pushing Congress to pass his authorization for the use of military force against ISIS wherever they may be found on planet Earth, and probably the rest of the solar system as well. And he's asking for a 3-year window on that, which is 1 year past the end of his own term in the White House, which means whoever wins in 2016 gets to inherit this mess. And that's interesting because so far, the front runners in both parties are kind of like not saying a whole heck of a lot about the wisdom or lack thereof of the president's actions here. Apparently, Rand Paul was being asked questions by reporters. According to National Journal, he just evaded them, didn't want to talk about it at all. All right, we're going to grab some phone calls here. We're going to go to Mo in Florida. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you just fine.
First of all, I want to say I love you, bro. You are the best, and I know you hate praise, but I'm going to make a little speech, and then I'm going to ask a question and hang up and get your answer. Okay, here's the thing. First of all, I think you are 93.675% accurate in what you talk about. Everything from the USS Liberty to the Federal Reserve to the Israeli control of the U.S. media. I've been married 40 years, Michael, and I got my wife here. I was talking to her this morning, and basically what she told me was, yeah, I've been talking to her for 20, 30 years about this stuff. And, yeah, but there's nothing we can do about it. They're too powerful. And I went and told her and gave her the little, brought up the movie about the ants and how the grasshoppers, I've done that a couple of times. But nobody does it better than you. My wife's sitting right here, and she's a very intelligent woman. But like I said, her thinking is there's nothing we can do about it. And I'm gonna ask you to address my wife here if you want, and explain to her in your words why it matters. And I'll hang up and get your response. Thank you.
Well, just imagine for a brief moment if Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Ben Franklin, John Adams, and the rest of them had the same attitude. Oh, Britain is too powerful. They're the empire of the world. The British Army and the British Navy just control everything. We can't do anything here. Where would we all be right now? Just something to think about there. All righty, we're going to go back to the phones here. Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, it seems like we can do something. It seems like a lot of things are crumbling down.
If I didn't think I was doing any good here, I'd quit and do something else because I'm not making any money doing this. You know, I'd quit and, like, become quality control inspector at a Chinese whorehouse or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of bloggers out there, a lot of people speaking out.
Yes.
I want to talk to you about the Baltic Dry Index.
Yes.
And I saw a thing yesterday. It was talking about the shutdown of the U.S. ports. And I was wondering if those two are related, or is it just a contractual dispute?
The shutdown of the ports is a contract dispute, but it is greatly exacerbated by the Baltic Dry Index, because right now shipping companies are running very much in the red. The port facilities are running in the red. They actually do not have any additional money with which they can raise the pay of the dock workers. I realize that's not the only issue in the contracts. But with the shipping slowing down the way it is, we're seeing shipping companies going into bankruptcy. We're seeing cancellation of orders for new cargo ships from shipbuilders, and it's spreading. And the timing of this contract dispute is very unfortunate, but the old contract is up, and the unions are trying to push for new concessions, some reasonable, some less so. But they really ought to open their eyes and wake up and realize that the other side is not in a position of being able to more generously compensate those unionized dock workers. And they do make a good living. You know, these are not minimum wage workers. They actually do very, very well for the work that they do. And it is important work, and it's important that it operates smoothly. But right now, if they go out on strike for higher pay, that the shipping companies and the port facilities are simply unable to come up with, it may be a problem. We could even be pushed to a situation where Obama would have to repeat what Harry Truman did, and basically take over the industry and manage it, which the Supreme Court slapped Harry Truman down for doing that, and even Harry Truman admitted they were right to do so. But those ports are essential. I mean, we could see the entire supply chain for the western part of the United States start to disintegrate over this whole situation, because if the ports are on strike, then the trains don't have anything to carry. So the train corporations get into trouble. The people who have the track right-of-ways are not getting their fees to maintain the tracks. It's a serious, serious problem. And frankly, I think, while not necessarily going in and federalizing or taking things over, I think the White House should be out there trying to smooth this thing over right now. If I were the president, I'd be on the plane to the West Coast right now and sit down with those people and say, look, this is the reality that you're going to have to deal with. I know you guys want more money, and I'm not saying that you don't deserve it, but they don't have it right now because the shipping has slowed to a crawl.
Yeah, one more thing, too. That whole thing you said about Brian Williams, I think you're correct on that. They're making way too much of a big deal about it.
Yes.
Making him an example, saying, hey, see, he lied, but nobody else in the media does.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. But it has backfired because everybody's looking at the Brian Williams story as confirmation for their observation that all these paid talking heads in the corporate news are lying about one thing or another. The only difference is that Brian Williams' lies were not officially sanctioned by the United States government, and that's why he got into trouble.
Yeah, it doesn't explain all the other lies that Hillary and all the other politicians have said.
Well, Hillary is laying very, very low right now because of her own lies about being under sniper fire. And somebody was joking that maybe she's on a 6-month suspension from the Democratic Party for having fibbed about that.
Yeah, she is laying low right about now, isn't she?
Yes, she is.
All right, thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. Now, over at whatreallyhappened.com, we posted a flashback to a video interview that was done by INFOWARS.com, where a former CIA contractor was interviewed saying ISIS is a completely fabricated enemy by the United States government. And this is consistent with our conclusion that the United States couldn't get Iraq to do anything overt, couldn't get Iran to do anything overt, couldn't get Syria to do anything overt. They are beginning to realize that lying about nuclear weapons or sarin gas or a nuclear program isn't getting any traction with the American people to support these wars. So they just made up a whole new enemy, because we all knew that Al-Qaeda was a fake. And they've made up this new enemy, and it's terrible, and it's making gains, and it's beheading people, and it's burning Jordanian pilots. And personally, I think it's about 200 guys with a bunch of flags and a video production unit. And all the Obama's going to do now, especially if he gets this authorization from Congress, is he's just going to send in these covert units to go into a country, stand up and get photographed waving the ISIS flag to say, oh, see, ISIS is there, and I already have permission to attack this country to get ISIS. And I think that's all ISIS is. It's a whack-a-mole made-up enemy that allows the president to simply attack any country that isn't doing what they're being told. Remember what Obama actually said the other day. The U.S. has to arm twist other nations militarily to get them to do what the U.S. wants. And I think that's what ISIS is. ISIS is the excuse given to the public while the U.S. government arm twists other countries into going back to Bretton Woods and the petrodollar deal. I think that's all it is. And ISIS is a name that gets dumped on anybody who refuses to do what the U.S. government and, more importantly, the U.S. banking system tells them to do. Oh, you don't like debt slavery? You must be ISIS. We have to bomb you now. That's what it is. So, anyway, we're coming up here on our top of the hour news break. Apparently, officials inside Syria are now confirming that the U.S. strike last December did kill a lot of civilians. The official story from the Pentagon is no. Everybody who dies under a U.S. weapon, they're a terrorist. We know that for an absolute fact. And I don't think anybody is believing the Pentagon anymore. They ran out of their egg timer a long, long time ago. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Looking at the emails coming in, and somebody wrote in saying, Happy Friday the 13th. Celebrate by burning a Templar, which I should take offense at since I have Templars in my family tree. But another story that came in from a couple of places. Apparently, the United States Geological Survey reported a 6.8 magnitude earthquake in Russia near both Belarus and Ukraine, and then retracted it. And people are sending this to me saying, was it evidence of a nuclear weapon being used? No, somebody tripped over the seismograph. That's probably what happened. All righty, let's see here. Now, down in Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro has announced the thwarting of a U.S.-backed coup d'etat that involved 5 high-ranking officers in their Air Force who apparently were being bribed by the United States government to literally bomb Maduro's palace. We know the United States has wanted to get into Venezuela. They were trying to get Hugo Chavez out there because, gosh darn that, Venezuela, they're selling their oil for currencies other than the dollar, and that cannot be allowed to stand. Venezuela has proven very resilient, very resistant to U.S. efforts to take it over, and I wish them luck continuing to do so. Now, we're seeing this story that came out of Washington Times. 4,000 combat troops from Fort Carson, Colorado's 3rd Brigade combat team are now on the way to Kuwait. Once they are there, they'll be the largest ground force in the region. So, exactly who is the United States planning to invade? Well, we know they want to project power from Kuwait, if necessary, into Iraq and then eventually Iran. They're moving the pieces into place here. We know who the warmonger is in our current age. It's not Russia, it's not China, it's not even Iraq, not even Iran. Look who's doing all the invading, drone striking, overthrowing. That's who the villain is. And 50 years from now, I am convinced the people of planet Earth will gaze on the stars and stripes with the same revulsion that our generation gazed on the swastika. And those in the government who still think the old rule applies, that the history books are written by the victors, that's not valid anymore in the age of the Internet. So, just something to keep in mind. over in Poland, we've been talking about the farmers' strike there, where they're going in to the capital with their tractors and demonstrating, and now they're using their tractors to blockade motorways. It's a dramatic escalation of the protests here, and there's a couple of things going on we need to pay attention to. First of all, Poland, like so many of the other nations in that part of the world, have been hammered hard by these Russian sanctions, which have backflashed on Europe much harder than they've hit Russia. And apparently there is a growing scandal there because so many of the Polish farmers have now been driven to the edge of bankruptcy. They're being forced to sell their land at rock-bottom prices to large American corporations. And they're not happy about that at all. Remember, we were reporting this story the other day that heavy machinery exports from Europe to Russia have just plunged because of the sanctions. And at the same time, the United States, which was pushing for these sanctions, heavy machinery exports to Russia have actually gone up by 40%. We're making money on these little side deals. Now, the farmers are also asking for legalized direct sales of farm produce. They want to be able to sell directly to the consumer. Apparently, Polish law is they must sell to the large supermarket corporations and nobody else, and then supermarket corporations get their piece of the action, so forth and so on. They want a reform of inheritance laws so that they can leave more of their wealth to their children. Farms tend to be multi-generational entities, and here's the most important one of all, I think. The Polish farmers are striking, demanding that the Polish government ban the cultivation and sale of genetically modified organisms in that nation. So they know how bad this stuff is as well. Now, turning to the economy, as you know, they had a real good day on the stock market. The Dow closed above 18,000. They were all dancing their happy dance. S&P 500 hit an all-time record high. And, of course, none of it makes sense when you're looking at indicators like the Baltic Dry Index, the real scale of the unemployment numbers. The only way these numbers can be there is the Federal Reserve is just creating tons of money out of thin air and giving it to the Wall Street firms, which are buying the stocks to keep the market up, to make it look good, to have the Dow as a flag that the government can wave at you saying, 18,000 Dow, 18,000 Dow, see, the economy is good. If you're hungry, starving, jobless, and homeless, it's your fault. It's not our fault. We didn't do anything wrong. 18,000 Dow, 18,000. That's what they're doing with this. They've been using the Dow as a political flag since the Clinton administration. And I was watching the corporate media going on and on about above 18,000, above 18,000. And I think it's a real red warning sign. When you see the corporate news media treating the stock market indicators like a sports score, that's a bad sign. Because they're not talking about the underlying reality of the economy. They just want that number to wave at you. Going to get some cheerleaders out there in gold lame bikinis and pom-poms going, go Dow, higher, higher. That's how ridiculous it's gotten there. Now, over in Europe, Dijsselbloem, who's part of the negotiations about Greece, is saying they're very pessimistic about a deal this coming Monday. And the reason the deal is not likely to happen is the EU and the ECB won't back down from their hardline position that Greece must keep the commitments made by previous governments. Make the payments on time, keep the payments as high as they are, keep austerity in place, and of course, the Syriza party can't do that without destroying its own credibility with the Greek voters. But the ECB and the EU can't cut Greece any slack because then the rest of the EU member nations are going to demand exactly the same thing. So they're both stuck. And I think Greece is going to leave the European Union. They're going to default on at least that portion of the debt that was created through fraud. And that will trigger a derivatives firestorm. Now, Czech President Miloš Zeman had an interview this week with the national online newspaper Blesk, and he was very forthcoming in saying that there was, in fact, a large group of countries within the European Union who were dead set against the Russian sanctions, knew they were going to cause their countries harm, and said that the proper way for us to be dealing with Russia is trade, economic cooperation rather than siding on with the United States agenda of political confrontation. Basically said that unless the sanctions are lifted soon, the Czech Republic is in serious trouble because their economy was very heavily connected to Russia. And we've had a lot of these EU leaders come out and say that, yes, the U.S. arm twisted us into going along with this. We knew it was going to be terrible for our countries and our people. But no sacrifice is too great for the United States government to tick off the Russian leadership. That's one of the most dangerous things that we're seeing in this rush to war is how many leaders of countries like Obama, like Netanyahu, are absolutely oblivious to the harm and suffering they're causing the people of planet Earth. They just have that vision in their head of we're going to get Putin, we're going to get Iran, and nothing else matters at all. And that's why we're in some serious trouble right now. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking at Fox News right now, and they're running a story on famous college dropouts, which strikes me as really important, urgent news at this stage of the game. And they're talking people like, Bill Gates or Oprah Winfrey, who left college to go on out and do what they were going to do. And I also fall into that category. I walked out of college in my senior year. And, we'll do that story some other day. We got more important things to talk about. Let's take a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Boy, you got to stop watching Fox News between Ollie North, John Hannity, and those armchair general, washed-up people like Ralph Peters and all those nutbags. That channel's it's up there with MSNBC and CNN. It's just trash people.
Well, I switch around to the other corporate media outlets, but they're all basically saying exactly the same talking points. So I save wear and tear on my little remote here by leaving it on Fox here. I used to watch NBC News, but they've made Brian Williams go away. So I'm boycotting them in protest.
I remember I said this a while ago. It's the bricks versus the pricks. And the bricks is winning because if you look at India, their GDP is going to surpass China. So you're going to have India,
already
China.
Has.
And then America is falling behind. And see, the West is out of ammo, basically. We just can't do anything economically against the BRICS because as a BRICS, as a group, it's impossible to destroy them as a group. Now, individually, yeah, but as a group, there's no way you can destroy them as a group. So we're going to have to do it militarily, and I think there's a rift you can see in Europe and probably in the U.S. for a military confrontation because there's enough people that probably know will lose. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place at this point, you know what I mean?
Well, I think the knowledgeable observers are looking at how the economy of the world fared under the Bretton Woods Agreement and under the petrodollar agreement, and they're realizing that if there is another war and the United States should by some miracle prevail, they're just going to restart that same predatory behavior all over again. And why would anybody want to support that? The other factor you need to understand is right now the U.S. paper dollar is held up with a lot of bluff and bluster and backed up with the threat of invasion if you start laughing at it. If you get a U.S. dollar in trade and you bring it back to the United States, there really isn't much that you can get for it that anybody wants. Our manufactured goods are very expensive and poor quality. Nobody wants our agricultural produce. But if you take a ruble or a yuan in trade, you can go back to Russia or China and buy quality manufactured goods or healthy GMO-free agriculture, and that's an insurmountable situation. And I think what's going to happen is ISIS is going to suddenly start appearing in one after the other of the BRICS nations, so the U.S. can pick them off one at a time. But the BRICS nations they're not going to fall for that. They're going to realize what's going on. And this new world war is shaping up with the United States and Israel and maybe Great Britain against pretty much everybody else.
You know, 90, I think 10 years ago, 90% of we're using the dollar. Now it's down to, 60%.
Yes.
So everything's accelerating. So maybe in the next 3 years there'll be, 20%. At that point, the U.S. has ran out of time. Like, they know they ran out of time. The whole West does, like Britain and stuff, because look at Putin. This year he's got 200 more airplanes adding to the arsenal, and he's adding another ship, and he's adding the S-500s by 2007. So they know they got a window, and I think the window's already closed.
I would agree with you. This whole dollarization of the world was all supposed to be completed in 2008. And they've obviously gone off the rails on that one. But I disagree with the idea that we're going to see the dollar usage decline over the next 3 years to less than 50%, because it's almost like the analogy of the bird on the wire. When you've got a whole bunch of birds on a wire, one will fly off, then another will fly off, and then all of a sudden they all take off at the same time. And that's what's going to happen with the U.S. dollar. It's going to reach a point where the rest of these nations are going to say, okay, we all acknowledge the dollar is worthless. It is an absolute fraud, and if we all quit the dollar at the same time, the U.S. can't bomb all of us, and we're going to gamble and take the risk. Again, look at the way the Roman Empire fell apart. After they could no longer enforce their will on all the provinces militarily, the provinces started breaking away. That's what's going on. I'm looking at this story here that came out of Washington Times. Apparently this attack on the base in Iraq was carried out by people in Iraq uniforms. But of course, we just know they're really ISIS. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the government of Iraq has decided now is a really good time to get the U.S. out of their country. We don't actually know. It's not like ISIS has ID cards or anything.
All I know is Putin and the Chinese, the art of war, death by 1,000 paper cuts, and that's that's it.
Russia and China don't have to do a thing except not let the U.S. provoke them into war. Everybody's just going to sit back, have a beer and some popcorn, and watch the United States finish destroying itself.
Exactly. All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, you got it. Thank you very much for the phone call here. Now then, let's see. Getting on back to the economic news. 2 months after officially emerging from bankruptcy, the city of Detroit has now been hit with legal bills from that bankruptcy to the tune of $178 million. And apparently U.S. Federal Judge Stephen Rhodes said that, that's a reasonable fee for all that was done for the bankruptcy. So now Detroit has this huge bill to pay off. How are they going to pay it off? Well, they're going to cut services and support for their people. That's always the solution from the money junkies. We just heard it from Christine Lagarde regarding Ukraine. We'll give you more money, but you got to stop taking care of your people. They're just a waste of time and money. If we're not able to make profits off of them, just let them die in this cold, harsh winter here. Now, there is a bright voice of common sense out there. Over in Montana, Republican Bill Harris is saying that tax credits ought to be extended to companies who help their employees pay down their student loans. I think it's a good idea. Where it falls flat is that most of these students coming out of these colleges with huge student loans aren't able to find a job with a decent employer. We got a lot of people with master's degrees working in the fast food restaurants. The jobs just are not here. And until they come back, until we restore high-tech manufacturing to this country, we're stuck. That whole bottom of the pyramid has crumbled. And nobody wants to pay attention to that. The people at the top are just saying, well, the poor don't have anything anymore. We'll start stealing from the middle class. Oh, the middle class don't have anything more. We'll start looting the upper middle class. And when they're out of money, we'll loot the upper middle class. Until all the money is sucked up at the very top and the entire nation is paralyzed. And the money junkies will be rolling around on piles of coins and bars and notes in the nude and having orgasms and thinking this is what heaven is supposed to be like. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I took that caller's advice and I switched over to CNN during the commercial break. And the first story they had up there is ISIS is planning to attack the heart of Europe. ISIS is in Europe. It's a crisis. And I'm sure over at the White House they're already saying, well, I guess we're going to have to bomb the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And we're going to have to bomb the Vatican. And we're going to have to bomb the Tower of London. And we're going to have to bomb that thing that looks like an atom up in Brussels. That's what that authorization for the use of military force, as written by Obama, says. Anywhere ISIS is, the U.S. can bomb. It's a carte blanche for war on the rest of the world here. Getting on back to the economy, this HSBC scandal is not going away anytime soon. And the people of the United Kingdom and for that matter Europe, are very enraged. And I imagine pretty much everybody around the world who is struggling with impossible to pay taxes and has been mollified with the claim that, well, the rich are paying their share, they're paying more than you are, so shut up. And it turns out that's not true. The system is all about taking taxes from the poor and letting the rich keep their money. And the latest bits coming out on that, reported in The Independent. A whistleblower has leaked an email proving the British government knew this tax evasion was going on for the last 7 years. Just going to look the other way. And there's reason to. There's another story that's coming out about this one. This is an ugly story, and I hope it gets traction and forces some changes in Great Britain. Story in the Mirror. David Cameron's in-laws have a lot of links with these tax avoidance systems. Apparently, his wife Samantha's family is dug in very deep to this clandestine financial system. Let's see. The Prime Minister's mother-in-law, Lady Astor, has a luxury furniture store, Oka Direct. It's more than 50% owned by anonymous shareholders through accounts held in Guernsey. And there's just a whole list here. And it ends with the observation the Prime Minister is being called a hypocrite after boasting about clamping down on tax dodgers. Well, yeah, they're clamping down on the poor tax dodgers, the middle-class tax dodgers, the little people. We're going to clamp down on them. They're not being obedient. Another story coming out of The Independent. I love this one. Lord Fink is admitting that, yeah, he was sort of involved in this thing to, get out of paying taxes, and he justifies it saying everyone's doing it. Everybody's doing this stuff here, except, of course, for the working people who don't have access to these kinds of little tax avoidance systems. It's the province of the rich. You little people, you must play by the rules and pay the taxes here. We're elite. We have money. We're above the laws of men and morality and ethics here. Jeff Epstein certainly proved that one here. And we're seeing some very angry articles coming out over at the Daily Mail. They've got one saying, we should all rage at how Her Majesty's Revenue Commission Gestapo pick on the little people while arranging these very cozy deals with the super rich. And I saw another one that was out there saying that for all this talk about equality, British society very clearly is set up to favor the rich. And apparently Ed Miliband is out there being accused of trying to start a new class war by calling attention to this scandal. Well, there already is a class war. There's always been a class war. It's permanent. It's the war waged by the 1% against the rest of us all to keep us their slaves, to loot us, to plunder us, to send our children off to die in their wars of conquest. There's never been a break in the class war. It's just always been one-sided, and they hoped you wouldn't notice. But we notice these things now. Now, following up on jokes about Brian Williams and the rest of it, there's a very interesting little story over at RINF.com, fact-checking Fox News on the poor and hungry. Because apparently Fox News has been called out for statements they made regarding the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, saying that Obama is simply buying votes by keeping millions of Americans on the SNAP rolls, despite the full economic recovery. Well, with those last three words, we know that Fox News is full of it. There is no full economic recovery. There's a manufactured media illusion that the economy is doing well, bolstered by those very obviously rigged stock market numbers. But you shouldn't be listening to the corporate media or the government about what the economy is doing, especially with the unemployment numbers so obviously being deception. 5.6 unemployment in a nation with 93 million Americans willing and able to find work who can't find a job, college-educated kids who can't find a job that uses their skill set. Don't let Obama and the TV networks tell you what the economy is doing. Walk down the street of your local city, town, or village. Take a look at the retail vacancies. Take a look at the cracks in the pavement and the sidewalk. Take a look at the rust and corrosion on the street lights and the bridges. Take a look at how many homeless people are out there. And then you decide for yourself if this economy is working. Because around here, it sure isn't. Now, as you heard on the SRN news break up in Canada, the Sun News Network had to shut down. They were trying to find a new owner because they were struggling and not really getting much of anywhere. Some of the people writing into me were saying that Sun News was essentially Canada's version of Fox News, and they're not entirely upset that it is now gone. But we know that the corporate media here in America is in serious trouble. They're being propped up because they don't have the audience anymore. They can't generate the ad revenues anymore. A lot of these cable channels, they're running the same movies over and over and over and over and over again. And after you've seen The Bourne Tedium for 27 times, you just turn that box off. But they're being propped up by their corporate owners because that's the corporate Ministry of Propaganda and the government Ministry of Propaganda. Another story coming out of Ex-Republic TV. Apparently people are going back and looking at a lot of the other claims made by Brian Williams, and they're finding that maybe he was being a little bit less than truthful, more than a little bit more self-aggrandizing. And apparently John Berman has taken a look at claims Brian Williams made about flying into Iraq with members of SEAL Team 6 and presents that SEAL Team 6 gave to him. And that may have been a whole made-up situation. And maybe Brian Williams and all these other talking heads, in their heart of hearts, they know they're being paid to lie and mislead the public. So they have to build up their self-image some other way. They can't feel good about being paid liars to the public. So they got to bolster themselves some other way. Oh, I was shot down in Iraq. I was with SEAL Team 6. I was the first man on the moon. I personally helped launch the RMS Titanic. Whatever else they're going to be saying. But these people are not paid millions of dollars to tell you the truth. You can get the truth for free. They're paid millions of dollars because they can convince people to believe the lies. But it looks like those days are pretty much over. A skeptical people is a free people. And you all need to be very skeptical of everything you are hearing. And you need to be your own best analyst as to what is really going on. We'll be back after these commercials. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show, and that was a very appropriate piece of intro music because over the break somebody sent me a little more comprehensive overview about the firebombing of Dresden, which took place 70 years ago today, and I'm going to paraphrase it loosely, but this is basically what we're talking about. February 13th, 1945. The war in Europe is pretty much over. Germany is in ruins. Winston Churchill orders U.S. and British bombers to drop 3,300 tons of incendiary bombs on Dresden, which was not a military city. In fact, it was a hospital city and was the location where refugees from other bombed locations in Germany were seeking shelter. Now, according to this little thing I'm looking at, the death toll from the Dresden firebombing was 500,000 people burned alive. Civilians. And we're supposed to get angry about one Jordanian combat pilot so that we're going to be willing to fling our sons and daughters into another major war. I don't think so. We're not going to let that happen. Alrighty, we're going to grab another phone call here. Michael in D.C., aloha, welcome to the show. How's the weather over there right now?
Wind chill is about, I think, 9 degrees, so it's not as good over there in Hawaii.
No, it's cool here. It's unusually cool, but it's still comfortable. I'm wearing a T-shirt.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
I have a certain question. Recently, I've been watching YouTube videos, and I usually watch a couple activists, like Christopher Green from AMTV, Luke Wardowski from We Are Change, and don't really listen to Alex Jones because I find him a fear mongerer. I wanted to know your opinion on Alex Jones.
Well, that's a complex issue because Alex was the one who actually got me coming into talk radio back in 2007, which I'm very grateful for. We disagree on some topics, and Alex chose to make it personal, and I didn't, and that's why I left GCN for a while, and now the prodigal son has returned. Alex, of course, has got a very large, well-funded media empire, and he knows that a little bit of fear-mongering helps to build audience. And that is the reality of the media industry, regardless of whether it's Alex Jones or anybody else. And we see that in politics. Look how much press they get screaming about human-caused global warming. They'll get headlines. Scientists do that as well. A scientist says, I've discovered something interesting and it's not that important, nobody's going to pay attention to them. But if a scientist says, I've discovered this little phenomenon and it's the potential end of the world, then the media is going to show up and funding will follow. That's how these things work. So, it's what Alex does is understandable.
Mm-hmm. And I'm switching lanes right now. Have you heard of Robert Galen Ross Sr.?
No, that doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, well, he interviewed Madeline Duncan Ross, who was the kind of, the side chick for what was his name? He was the president who was kind of behind JFK's killing.
You mean Johnson?
Johnson. Why can't I remember his name? He had a chilling interview with her. Maybe you could watch it. She talks all about the meeting that all those people had before the night of Kennedy's assassination. Mm-hmm. And I found it really interesting. It was pretty cool to watch. One other thing, I just wanted to thank you for all the information you give out. I found it so useful, and you don't fear-monger people. You don't instill fear. You strictly give out facts and tell how the world is and what's going on in politics and what's really going on. I just wanted to know, do you know how big your audience is?
No, I don't. I don't know what my GCN audience is. It might just be you today. I do know that I have a good reach with the website. I look at my server logs, and once I subtract out all the constant pinging from the NSA and the Milnet that are trying to jam my server here, I'm reaching about 3 million people a month.
Wow, that's awesome.
And that doesn't count reposts. People take my shows, they make YouTube videos, and they forward my articles, and I don't even bother trying to keep track of that because that's really kind of secondary importance to just getting the information out. The reason I don't like to fear-monger, even though it would probably build my audience, is because I don't want Americans to be afraid right now. I want them to basically say, we're in a serious situation, but it can be changed, and I've got the courage to do it. And so fear-mongering actually works against that. The government wants you to be afraid. Corporate media wants you to be afraid, because then you're easy to steer and control. And I sort of go the other way.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay, thank you for talking. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Yeah, I'm not going to be here tomorrow. I'm going to be spending tomorrow with my lady love because it's Valentine's Day. Okay, now, interesting little story, because tomorrow marks 13 years that British resident Shaker Amr has been in Guantanamo Bay without charge or trial. Now, Mr. Amr is a father of 4 from London. He has been cleared for release under both the Bush and Obama administrations. No less than 6 government agencies have confirmed he has done nothing wrong and poses no threat. And yet, he is still being kept in Guantanamo, despite requests from the British government that he be returned to his family in South London. Now, there's really only one possible explanation for this. And we already know this to be true because of other cases like Binyam Mohammed. Things far worse than waterboarding have been done to this guy. His body bears scars and marks of what was done. And even though he is innocent and has been officially cleared for release, national security dictates that he be kept away from the public and certainly away from reporters. Because the U.S. government is still laboring under this delusion that the rest of the world is not yet realizing that the U.S. government uses torture to extract politically expedient confessions from people. We've got the mastermind of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and it only took 184 waterboardings to prove that. Anyway. Now, there's this story going on about these 3 Muslims who were killed in North Carolina. The funeral drew so many people. They had to take the funeral services out of the mosque and go over to a nearby athletic field. 5,000 people showed up. Now, when this story first broke, the corporate media was saying it was an argument over a parking space, which is not entirely unreal. When I lived in North Hollywood, I witnessed a killing over a parking space. Not mine, thankfully. And yes, drugs were involved. Now the FBI is investigating this as a hate crime because apparently the suspect that they arrested had made some comments. And they're trying to downplay this because, remember, hate crimes are only against black people or they're only against Jewish people. And, we can't show Muslims as being victims of this kind of stuff, although the Obama White House, to its credit, has come out with some comments about that and sympathies for the family. But I notice the corporate media is now trying to characterize the suspect in a way that we're not going to go any further than that. They've characterized him as a gun-loving atheist who hated all religions. And this is just more propaganda to demonize gun owners and to demonize those who refuse to be slaves to organized religion. And by and large, with a few exceptions who like the media attention, atheists don't hate religion. We sort of chuckle indulgently at it, to be very honest, and take joy in the fact that our Sunday mornings are free to do things like washing our cars. But they're already out there trying to use this incident to demonize whoever they feel needs to be demonized. Oh, it's those gosh darn atheist gun lovers. Which I score 2 for 2 on that one, I'll admit it. All right, interesting little stories about immigration, but we're coming up on our top of the hour news break. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us on the microphone. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and the phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Looking at CNN, the third invasion of Iraq is well and truly underway. They're reporting helicopter gunships are attacking ISIS positions. Well, how do we know? Because of that report from last night where the people that they're calling ISIS are wearing Iraqi uniforms.
And the other issue is how the darned heck do you win what is essentially a ground war from the air?
Well, you don't. That was the lesson of Vietnam. And for those of you watching on BAM User, that second voice that just chimed in here is my lovely Lady Claire.
Aloha and good afternoon, everyone.
And happy early Valentine's Day to you.
Yes, thank you.
And congratulations on your little recognition of your music that happened. And I'm not going to go into details because the bad people will try and find some way to screw it up. No. But Claire had a little long overdue and much appreciated recognition of her composer skills earlier today. So we're all kind of happy about that one here.
Yes, definitely.
All righty. So what is the first thing you want to talk about?
Apparently today, President Obama will be unleashing his latest executive order, one which will set the stage for Information Sharing and Analyses Organizations, or as an acronym, ISAOs. It sounds very Japanese somehow. Now, those of you who remember, in the aftermath of the Snowden whistleblowing scandal, which has now been all but forgotten.
Not around here, it hasn't.
There was a brief period when there seemed to be some of the growth of U.S. spying apparatus would be halted, if not put into reverse. Well, not so much. Those days are long forgotten, and today Obama is expected to sign an executive order that aims to make it easier for the government to share classified cyber threat information with companies. So, in other words, it's a kiss your privacy goodbye moment.
Yeah, because, this is all being sold as necessary for security and the fight against terrorism. But basically, what Obama is authorizing with this executive order is for the government's collection of information about you to be given to large corporations for their marketing, research, or to possibly find other ways to mess around with you.
Yeah, and I've stated my position as clearly as I can. Okay, Christian pacifist, yes. I never advocate violence. But to all of the alphabet soups that are surveilling us and trying to hack Mike's machine, we're not the problem.
We never have been.
No.
And you just brought up another issue we need to be aware of. Obama is about ready to start just taking all of this information collected on law-abiding American citizens and put it out on networks going to these corporations where it's going to be wide open for hackers to get information. Social security numbers, pictures of your significant other in states of undress, for nefarious purposes. The government has already proven time and time again they can't protect your data.
No.
Corporations have proven that they can't protect your data. Look at that story we just had about this health insurer who got this record-setting hack. And so Obama is basically taking your private life and just putting it out there in the wild for any cyber criminal to help themselves to.
And I really feel frustrated by this. I really feel that if there is going to be a conversation about this issue, it should have been placed in some legislation and at least debated. But President Obama is executive order happy.
And I'm not sure this executive order is really valid because it is a violation. I mean, the whole system is a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah.
And executive orders can't do that. And there's absolutely no limits on what corporations can avail themselves of this data. And that's what makes it so dangerous.
Yep.
How's it going to fight terrorism for the Max Factor Corporation to be getting information about my wife's cosmetic use?
Yeah, it just, it's yet another infringement and impingement upon our way of life. And I know I say it sounding like a chipped CD, but those people with skills and kids, please get out of this country while you still can, because the window for that ability to even leave is running very close to the edge.
Yeah,
very close.
The borders are going to be shut.
Except for amnesty to illegals, which I think is...
That's true. The borders are wide open for them.
Yeah.
They're slamming the door on legal American citizens, but the illegals can just come and go as they will here. And by the way, and I know this relates to the story you're about to do. Apparently, the amnesty program, the Dreamers program, over at the Department of Human Services, the Department of Homeland Security, actually does include a provision to grant citizenships. Now, this was something President Obama assured us all was not going to happen with the amnesty program, and there it is. I'm not surprised Congress is trying to defund this whole mess.
Yeah, I certainly sort of wish they would. Mike, I'd like to sort of move over to another topic which I think is very important right now.
Yes.
And that has to do with the American prison population.
No, wait a minute. Weren't you going to do the one about the voting?
Oh, yes, I was. That wasn't quite next, but...
I'm sorry. I'm headed out of sequence here. But
okay, here, we can do this.
That's germane to what I just said.
Apparently, Obama's amnesty creates loopholes to enable illegal immigrants to vote in elections. And how this works, President Obama's temporary deportation amnesty will make it easier for illegal immigrants to improperly register and vote in elections. State officials testified to Congress yesterday.
Because essentially they're getting driver's licenses and Social Security cards, and in most states that's the only ID you need to register to vote.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, I hate to be picky about it, but I think voting should be something only legal American citizens are allowed to do.
I agree. I agree fully. And now I'd like to skip over to the articles I've been reading about the American prison population, because this is scandalous, folks. This is absolutely horrific. Here are the numbers. There are 2.3 million Americans in prison or jail. The U.S. has only 5% of the world's population, but 25% of its prisoners. 1 in 3 African-American men can expect to spend time in prison. That's terrible. There are 2.7 million minors with an incarcerated parent. The imprisonment rate has grown by more than 400% since 1970. This is obviously not working.
Oh, well, it works for the private prison corporations.
Yeah.
And it works for, these prison factories, which are driving non-prison businesses out of business,
right,
who can't compete with the low cost.
Yep.
And it really is. It's slave labor camps have come to the United States of America.
And I note with some interest that Sweden is closing its prisons. And there's a very logical reason why. Their approach is 100% rehabilitation. All right, you messed up, you're going to be with us for a while, you might as well get used to it, but we are going to give you tools so that when you get out of here, you can get a job, you can be with your family, you can reunite, reconnect. They're very good about visits with family, which a lot of American prisons are not. And there is another factor that I find rather amazing in American prisons, and that is, Mike, when women who are pregnant are giving birth, they're shackled. I mean, how completely medieval. I would expect this maybe of a Saudi Arabian prison, but not in the U.S., for heaven's sake.
That's pretty ugly here. But here's what's going on here. In our economy, the two problems are linked. Do you think anybody gets up one morning and says, I've got a normal life, I'm fine, I got a family, and I think today I'm going to embark on a life of crime.
No, it doesn't happen that way.
If you're in Congress, maybe. But for those of us out here in the real world, you know, if I can do what I do for a living, which is animation and visual effects, and I'm going to do that. I'm not going to go rob a convenience store. And if the same economy that is driving people to crime prevents them from coming out of prison and finding jobs to go back to and reintegrate with society, and it's a self-feeding cycle, and it's driven by politics and not a few campaign donations. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And what was the next thing you wanted to talk about?
Well, the next thing I wanted to talk about, and I start laughing, but the problem is stopping. For the fourth time in February, NATO dispatched Typhoon jets to track a Russian IL-20 today over the Baltic. And the person who is making these claims is none other than, drumroll please, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who claims that the intelligence service of the alliance has some documented data of Russian military presence in eastern Ukraine, and he announced it on air at the Kommersant FM radio. And get this, according to Stoltenberg, the militias of eastern Ukraine wouldn't have been able to achieve the successes they have without Russia's support. Now, I question that very intently.
Well, you need to understand that the forces in the eastern Ukraine used to be the forces in the western Ukraine.
Right.
And they switched sides and they took their weapons with them. And that's what's going on. NATO and the U.S. and Germany and Poroshenko have been screaming that Russia's in Ukraine for a year now and have yet to come up with convincing evidence to that fact. The OSCE is monitoring the border between Russia and Ukraine, and they're saying Russia has not come across. And let's have some common sense, people. If Russia went across that border into Ukraine, they'd be in Kiev 48 hours later.
Yeah. There's no question about that.
And one more comment here. There is nothing wrong with a Russian Ilyushin 28, was it 21? Doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong with a Russian plane flying over the Baltic Sea because that's international airspace, and they are allowed to go there. So is the United States, so is Britain, so is NATO.
Absolutely. And I would like to be hopeful that the truce will hold Sunday and Monday, but my gut is telling me no.
No, we already have one. The far-right faction of Poroshenko's government is already saying they will not abide by the ceasefire.
Well, apparently Poroshenko doesn't really have much pull in his own country, does he?
Well, that's what I was saying later in the show here. I'm starting to call it the minced agreement.
Yes, I hear you, as in chopped up into little bits and pieces. Absolutely. The next thing I'd like to talk about would be the decline in freedom of information in 2014.
You're not allowed to know that.
Now, this is originally from Zero Hedge. It's a blog that usually is pretty straightforward, and I have a great respect for their contributors. And you have to look at maybe not one big thing, but a lot of little things, like the repressive tactics used against reporters at Ferguson, attempts to arrest, prosecute, or disarm individuals filming the police, to attempts to strip the legal status of journalists and press from controversial individuals. We can't identify with that, dear.
No, we can't do that. But and you need to realize in the most recent ranking of press freedom in the world, the United States has sunk to 49th.
That is pretty depressing.
And that's measured regarding the corporate media. And not the independent media. You know, we're starting to get harassed with this whole new cybersecurity, and they're talking about regulating alternative media to make sure they're saying the same thing the government wants them to say.
Well,
not likely to happen. I'll turn this website into a porn website before I start putting out government or corporate propaganda for that matter.
But the implications, the draconian implications for chilled free speech are all too clear for people who are watching. And, you know, First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, the government is behaving as though that doesn't exist in American law anymore.
Well, that does seem to be the attitude, because there was an interesting case, you know, the Electronic Frontier Foundation brought a lawsuit against the National Security Agency to basically say what you're doing violates the Fourth Amendment. And the NSA apparently had blackmail information on the judge, because the judge threw the case out of court saying unless you can prove the NSA spied on you directly, you don't have standing to sue. And then said, I can't tell you how to get that information because that would violate national security. But the reality is, if you go back and you read that Constitution, up at the top in extra large letters it says, we the people. And what that means is that's our Constitution. And every living American does have standing to call the government to account when they are not abiding by the restrictions in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. This judge was either bought or he was blackmailed. And there's the danger when all this NSA spying on everybody. They're not just spying on the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. They're spying on members of Congress. They're spying on judges. They're digging out all the dirt on them in order to be able to blackmail them into doing whatever this national security dictatorship wants them to.
Yeah, it reminds me that one of my favorite films of all times is V for Vendetta.
Yes.
And people ultimately, if you've never seen it, I don't want to give it away, but if you've never seen it, buy it, rent it. It's one of the most startling films.
It's very well done.
About personal liberty and that balance where government needs to end and personal responsibility needs to take over, and it's very powerful, very powerful.
It is, and the knives are cool too.
Yes.
All right. We're almost to a commercial break. I'm going to insert a story in here. You've probably already seen it on TV. During the State of the Union speech, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was seen to nod out. And today she basically has admitted that she wasn't entirely sober at Obama's State of the Union speech. And my immediate response is, I don't blame her one bit. If I'd been forced to go in there and listen to Obama speak, I would have been absolutely ripped. You know, whole bottle of scotch. Get me into that Capitol building here.
I see. But it was rather noticeable that she did seem to not be with the program for a while.
I imagine everybody else sitting around her were jealous and saying, why can't I nod out and not have to listen to this nonsense coming out?
Yeah.
And one more story. We're killing time here before the next commercial break. As you already heard on the SRN News Break, Oregon Governor John Kitzhaber is resigning from office under pressure from his party and his legislature, and apparently he's Oregon's longest-serving governor, and apparently he's caught up in this huge corruption scandal involving his fiancée, who was using information he provided to her to basically make herself richer. And it's sort of been a roller coaster this week, where earlier he was going to step down, then he changed his mind, and then now he's changed his mind again, and he's going to be leaving.
But that seems to be the way of the world in politics, right? People enriching other people's pockets, or their own.
Or their own, very much so. And I think it's good that America's waking up and realizing that anybody who's standing up there and spending millions of dollars of other people's money to get a job that pays maybe $100,000 a year. They're not doing it for the good of the people in the nation. They're out there to make money for themselves and their friends. And there are very precious few exceptions to that. Dr. Ron Paul, obviously one. Cynthia McKinney's another.
Yes.
And unfortunately, they are no longer in Washington, D.C., and it's a reminder that the moral and the immoral are mutually exclusive societies. And once a government starts to go bad, it goes all the way bad. We have to take a break for some commercials. We'll be right back with the Lady Claire after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to Claire here, I have to issue a minor correction. During the first hour, I was talking about how the ex-president of Italy, Giorgio Napolitano, had come out agreeing that the situation in Ukraine goes back to this drive to lure Ukraine into the European Union, had nothing to do with Russia, and apparently I misspoke and identified him as the ex-president of Israel. They both begin with an I, and, you know, the copy hadn't kicked in here, but I do need to make that correction because I'm getting emails on it, and they're out there saying, no, he's Australian. All righty, so your next story is?
This is from Blacklisted News.
Yes.
Egypt may intervene militarily if the Yemeni Strait is closed. Now, what's going on here is that the Houthis, who have taken control of the government, have taken control of the country, want to control the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, as it is one of the most important strategic oil transport chokeholds in the region.
Basically, that's the path from the Gulf of Aden into the Red Sea, and it is a strategically important location. That's why the United States had a puppet regime in control of Yemen to make sure that choke point remained open. At this point, I think Yemen would be well advised to not give the U.S. and Egypt a justification for attacks, but it does allow them to react very quickly and close that gap. If they feel that they're going to be pressured on it. And that's what this whole thing was about, was controlling that oil flow, controlling the access, and it is their territorial waters, at least for half of the width of that strait.
Right. And, Michael, what would you speculate that the U.S. is going to do now in Yemen, since Obama's policy to date has been an epic fail?
Oh, we're going to find that ISIS is in Yemen now. We've got to go in and we've got to bomb ISIS until Yemen guarantees the access to that strait. That's the new model. Wherever the U.S. wants to bomb and attack, ISIS is going to be there.
Really?
CNN says ISIS is in Europe, so I figure Obama's going to bomb the Louvre or something.
Yikes. Yeah, it's a nasty situation, and I have a feeling that we're going to be seeing U.S. troops on the ground in the entire region, in Yemen, Syria, and Iraq.
Well, they just sent 4,000 troops from Fort Carson to Kuwait.
Yes.
And I don't think they're there to do anything in Kuwait.
They're not there to do basket weaving.
No, they are definitely not.
No, I think that they're going to be used anywhere Obama feels he wants to use them.
ISIS is there. ISIS is there.
Yeah.
We've got the president who cried ISIS.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Yeah. And it gets to a point where you can't believe anything the government says because it's become completely unreliable.
Yes.
And as you say, the promises can be timed with an egg timer.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to go on to another issue of medical journals closing their eyes when publishing research ruled fraudulent or misleading by the FDA. Now, folks, when you go to a doctor, and I've been through this,
so have I,
you expect that what they prescribe you is going to be the best possible drug for the situation that you've got. And we have found out, and Michael mentioned this yesterday, that the big pharmaceutical companies are still cooking the books in terms of money that go to various doctors who are prescribing certain medicines which may not be the best for you, but they're getting kickbacks from the prescriptions.
It's all driven by the money here.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how there is research that calls into question the safety and efficacy of these medications, and the FDA will actually catch some of the fraud and send letters of notification, but the studies still get published in the journals, and the journals rarely, if ever, mention the fact that the FDA detected fraud in the experimental method. It's almost like the double-blind study has gone extinct in the entire process, which was designed to prevent this kind of fraud.
And apparently, there was a study by Charles Seif, a New York University journalism professor, and he reviewed 78 published papers on clinical trials with which the FDA labeled official action indicated, meaning that the agency found objectionable conditions or practices significant enough to warrant regulatory action. Only 3 of the papers mentioned the OAI status of the trials. The violations included researchers falsifying data and occurrences where clinical trial participants should have been ruled ineligible for the trials. One publication reported that all of the patients in a clinical stem cell trial on ischemic limbs demonstrated improvement, even though one of the subjects was forced to undergo an amputation 2 weeks after being treated.
The drug was working really wonderful up until he died.
Right. And in another case involving a trial of a chemotherapy regimen, the researcher eventually pleaded guilty to fraud and was sentenced to prison after poor test results were hidden. A patient died from the treatment. It's gotten to a point with American medicine where you really have to do your own due diligence.
I imagine Christian Science is taking off right about now here. I've been run over by a truck. Take me to a reading room.
Yeah, right. No, but we have to hold people in these big pharmaceutical organizations accountable when their drugs do harm.
Well, that's what the federal government is supposed to be doing with our tax money, but we keep seeing time and time again that all of these agencies set up to safeguard the public are really just theater productions to make us think that we're being protected from bad products. And then we find out how, like, the Securities Exchange Commission turned a blind eye to Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme for 12 years. Minerals Management Service was ignoring the fact that the manual blowout preventer on the Deepwater Horizon was 4 years past due for mandatory maintenance. We see this constantly with the USDA and FDA just saying, to the GMO manufacturers, give me a paper that says it's safe and we'll rubber stamp that. And that's exactly what they do. Because these pharmaceutical corporations have so much money, they're able to warp the government to just become another part of their marketing effort. And that's not what the government is. And that's fascism. That is outright fascism. When government and corporate interests are united together against the general public, that is fascism.
Well, what happened to me, and it should never happen to anyone, I was experiencing extreme pain in my joints. I couldn't play keyboard. I couldn't play my harp. And I was really in a bad state. So I went to the local HMO, and a couple of their people were podiatrists to whom they referred me. And I went through all kinds of tests except the one I really needed. And the medication that they gave me was not on label for the use of this particular drug, but they were assured by the drug manufacturer that if they told me that it was off label, it was perfectly okay to prescribe it for me for pain.
They put her on Neurontin.
Yeah.
And get your PDR and read about that. It was nasty stuff.
And when I went back to see my orthopod and he had some x-rays taken, he said, Claire, I can't see anything in the x-rays that would give me any indication that there was pain. And I remember driving home from Honolulu to Kaneohe and just in tears. And I came home to Mike and said, honey, when do I have the time to be a hypochondriac? Can you please tell me when I can pencil this into my schedule? And
we're almost at the commercial break, so let me wrap up the story.
All right.
What it turned out was that my wife, and she's not alone in this, is hypersensitive to a class of chemicals called formaldehyde precursors, which are used as preservatives in low-end cosmetics and household products. And by the way, formaldehyde is a known carcinogen, but they're allowed to put it in there. And one of the symptoms that it will provoke is extreme joint pain. But the doctors were all looking for reasons to put something into her, to sell her another product, and nobody was looking at something maybe she should be taking away.
That was the one test they did not do to me, was for chemical sensitivity. And I marched back into the orthopod's office, and I said, look, if you have someone of my age coming up with these symptoms, here's what you need to test for.
Oh, he'll never tell them. He'll never tell them because then he can't sell them more pills and drugs and creams and things like that. But it was so infuriating
because you found out what the problem was in like 40 minutes of research. Yes.
Dr. Mike. We got to take a break for commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Last segment of our Friday, the 13th program for all you Triskaidekaphobics out there. We're going to take one more phone call before we call it a day here, and we're going to go to Joey in New Jersey. Aloha, Joey. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike and Claire.
Aloha.
In scouring your page all day today, I inadvertently got off on a video by John Barber, who I thought you might know from your past experience in Hollywood, director.
Yes.
He did a thing, which seemed to me was only two years ago, in 2013, the Garrison tapes about the Kennedy assassination.
Yes.
and I was totally taken back about how almost up to date it was with names and people that are involved that are still alive.
Oh, well, that's the reason they put off the release of all the Warren Commission files until 50 years until after everybody's dead here. There are still people who are in very high positions that they attained following the assassination. And behind it all, of course, is the biggest cover-up of all, which is the link between Kennedy's assassination and his Executive Order 11110 that was such a threat to the Federal Reserve. That's why John J. McCloy was on the Warren Commission. He's not a homicide investigator. He was president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank, and he was there to make sure the American people never saw the link between the United States note and John F. Kennedy's assassination.
Wow. So you're familiar? Have you seen that documentary?
Not for a long time here, and I think one of the members linked it to the page here, but. It was a long time ago, and I tend to keep my focus on what's going on right now and right today. And at this point, come November, yes, we'll rehash the Kennedy assassination again. But right now our focus is in trying to keep this brouhaha in Europe and the Middle East from turning into an all-out nuclear war, because I've got a first-strike nuclear target right out this window.
Oh, I bet. Okay.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you. Great show.
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And Claire, you wanted to wrap up with a more romantic current topic.
Well, tomorrow is Valentine's Day, and there are all sorts of little thoughtful things that you can do that do not necessarily require a tub of money.
You could rotate my tires. Take my weights up to the attic.
Honey, we don't have an attic. I'm sorry to
I'll buy you an attic.
But there are little things that you can do. If you have that ability to cook something nice, do that. I can't bake sweets. It just didn't come in my DNA. But little gift certificates that you could maybe stick into your Valentine's Day card. I'm going to do this, that, or the other, and maybe it's a little project that your other significant person has kind of hinted that they would like to have done. I think that would be a sweet thing to do.
Rotating the tires. I can see where this is going.
Where?
You don't appreciate that weed whacker I bought you for Valentine's Day.
Oh, I'm sorry, dear. Now the truth comes out in front of heaven and everybody.
Okay.
Just please be kind to everyone in your life this next week, and be gentle and be careful, and try not to judge. We're all thinking sentient people are all under a lot of stress right now.
And we should never take it out on each other.
No.
Unfortunately, because of the way our society is structured, people are afraid to stand up to those they perceive as being above them. And so they take their anger and frustration and they direct it downward.
Yeah.
The CEO screams at the division manager can't talk back, so he turns around and screams at the department manager. The department manager doesn't want to talk back. He turns around and starts screaming at one of his workers. The worker can't talk back. The worker goes home and yells at his wife. The wife doesn't want to talk back to the husband. She screams at the kids. The kids can't fight back against her, so they go out and they kick the dog.
It's a vicious cycle.
And then the dog eats the cat. And,
Yeah, not good. But when you're getting stressed, just try to realize what's going on and understand that to great extent, it's stuff outside of you.
That's true.
And you have to focus on what you can actually do to make a difference and be able to have the grace to let go of what you can't do. But take care of what you can, because that's going to really help the stress level.
A really good rule that you should have in your house is what we call the magic bedroom door, which is whatever's going on in life, our jobs, our finances, the politics, we don't bring it into the bedroom. That is a turmoil-free zone.
Yes.
Where we just do a lot of cuddling at night, especially with the temperature down where it is.
Yes, it's been unusually cold. But again, think of some little things that are nice that you could do for the people you love and care about. Little notes that you could put into your Valentine's Day card, little certificates, if you will, of things that you can do that the other person in the relationship would really like for you to do.
Bottles of scotch, Cuban cigars. Now that we can get them again.
Yes, dear. I don't know how soon I'd be able to get you a Cuban cigar, but when they become legalized.
When they become,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
I think that's it, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, thank you for being on the show. I got about another 5 minutes left here, so let's go on and talk about a couple of interesting stories. Obviously, human-caused global warming. The New England area has another horrendous storm coming in, the worst one so far this winter. And spring is less than 3 weeks away now by the calendar, but they're predicting that this snowstorm that's coming in over the weekend is going to be the equivalent of a Category 2 hurricane, and it's just insane out there. And what's really interesting, everybody is still screaming about Obama's comment the other day that climate change is a greater threat to the United States than terrorism. Well, we all know the terrorism is fake to begin with, and so is the scream about human-caused global warming. But even for Obama, that was just a little bit out there, I think. And I'm looking at all these stories about the record cold all over the country, all over Europe here. And over in Geneva, the United Nations climate talks have ended, and they've reached an agreement to have another climate summit in Paris in December. So let's have another summit about human-caused global warming in the middle of the next record-setting winter. It must be great being a carbon Nazi. They get to go to places like Geneva and Paris and just sit around and talk about human-caused global warming and why won't those deniers go away here? It's just amazing.
Yep.
Current Ebola virus death toll in West Africa has reached 9,253. And here's a very, very bizarre story. This came out of Refreshing News 99. And apparently it involves this Christian group that is now launching a campaign to have the public school system stop teaching children about dinosaurs or anything else that happened before 6,000 years ago, which is when the Bible bangers say the earth just popped into existence with Adam and Eve and the rest of it. Speaking of Adam and Eve, the USDA and FDA have just approved a new genetically modified apple. So I can imagine Eve holding one of these GMO apples and telling Adam, go ahead, bite it. What's the worst that could happen?
And Adam saying, I don't feel so good.
All righty. Let's see, getting on back here. Oh, there's been another fishing vessel stuck in the Antarctic ice requiring to be rescued by an icebreaker here. And here was an article that I really enjoyed reading. It was over at dailycaller.com. Global warming is causing less and more snowfall. And basically it's going back over the fact that 10 years ago, all the global warming cultists were saying human-caused global warming means no more snow, no more ice, no more cold. And even last November, we were seeing these articles about because of human-caused global warming that there would be no record cold and snow this winter. Boy, were they wrong about that. Boston has now sailed past all-time records. This winter is the coldest and snowiest since they started keeping records, and they've still got a big storm coming on in. Same thing with New York.
And I have to wonder, Michael, there are no numbers or statistics that I've seen on the number of homeless who have died from hypothermia. Not one single one.
They are the invisible people.
Yeah.
And we know in Britain they gave us a number. It was in the thousands of pensioners. Yeah. And maybe that's just their way of getting rid of the homeless. We'll let them freeze to death, which is not a pleasant way to go, I might add. Turn them into garden mulch when the spring melt finally occurs. There's the music. It's time for us to get out of here. Have a good weekend. Have a happy Valentine's Day. Monday is President's Day, and we'll be back on the air live here on the Genesis Communication Network. So get on out there. Get those flowers and chocolates and all the rest of that for your significant other, or the Scotch and Cuban cigars. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.
Aloha.